I moved into this neighborhood for the quiet. 30 acres of rolling farmland, with a sturdy fence separating my property from the HOA-controlled suburb that bordered it. Out here, I could breathe. I could wake up to the sound of birds instead of honking cars. Sip my morning coffee on the porch without a neighbor peering over a too-short fence. This land had been in my family for generations, and I intended to keep it that way. But lately, something felt off. Started small. The latch on my gate left unhooked. Boot prints in the damp soil where no one should have been walking. First, I figured it was nothing. Maybe a lost dog. Maybe kids cutting through my land to save a few minutes on their walk to school. But the signs kept coming. A broken branch on my apple tree. A set of deep tire tracks cutting through my freshly tilled soil, ruining a section I'd been preparing for spring planting. Then I saw her. It was just before sunset. I was walking the property line when I spotted movement near my back fence. A woman, blonde bob, expensive-looking yoga pants, stood there with her hands on her hips, surveying my land like she owned it. She didn't see me, not at first. She was too busy scowling at my barn, at the tractors parked neatly along the side. Her lip curled like the very sight of my farm offended her. Then she climbed over my fence. I stepped out of the trees. "Excuse me," she gasped, whipping around like I'd caught her stealing. Which, in a way, I had. "Oh," she said, eyes narrowing. "You must be the farmer." The farmer. Not my name. Not even a polite sir. Just the farmer, as if I were a prop in the scenery of her neighborhood. "This is private property," I said, crossing my arms. "You're trespassing." Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked annoyed. "I was just having a look around. Your property is a bit of an eyesore, you know. Those big tractors? That ugly red barn? It ruins the aesthetic of the neighborhood." I stared at her, stunned. "You what?" She sighed dramatically, waving a manicured hand. "This whole area used to be beautiful before your farm got in the way. I'm on the HOA board, and we're discussing ways to improve property values. Maybe if you cleaned up a bit." "Let me stop you right there." My voice came out colder than I intended. "This land isn't part of your HOA. I don't answer to you or your board or your ridiculous property values. Now get off my land." She huffed but didn't argue. "Not yet." She turned and climbed back over the fence, muttering something under her breath. As she disappeared down the sidewalk, a bad feeling settled in my gut. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The first real sign of trouble came 2 days later. I woke up early, as I always did, ready to start the morning chores. But when I stepped outside, the scent hit me. Motor oil and gasoline, thick and cloying in the crisp morning air. My gut twisted as I walked toward my equipment. Somebody had slashed my tractor tires. Not just one, all of them. Deep, deliberate cuts through the thick rubber, the kind of damage that wasn't an accident. I crouched down, running a hand over the shredded edges. Whoever did this wanted me to know. They wanted to send a message. My mind flashed to her. HOA Karen, as I had started calling her in my head. The woman who sneered at my land like it was an offense to her suburban sensibilities. She had made it clear she didn't want my farm here. Had she really gone this far? I had no proof. I looked toward the fence line, toward the neatly trimmed neighborhood beyond. Perfect lawns, uniform mailboxes, houses painted in the same 3 shades of beige. The kind of place where people whispered behind closed doors and sent passive-aggressive HOA violation notices instead of handling things face-to-face. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a warning. I patched up what I could, but the unease settled deep in my chest. Over the next few days, more signs appeared. My well water started tasting strange. Faintly chemical, like someone had tampered with the supply. My fence, the one that should have kept unwanted visitors out, had a suspicious new gap in it, boards pried loose. And then, there were the footsteps. Late at night, long after I had locked up for the evening, I heard them. Soft crunching in the dirt just outside my bedroom window. By the time I grabbed my shotgun and stepped outside, the night was still empty. But I knew what I had heard. The final straw came when I caught her red-handed. It was just after dusk. I had set up a motion-activated light near the barn, hoping to catch whatever had been creeping around my land. Sure enough, the light flared to life. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed outside. And there she was, HOA Karen, standing by my water pump, a wrench in her hand. She had the audacity to smile when she saw me. "Oh, you startled me," she said, her voice all fake sweetness. "I was just inspecting this, making sure it's up to code." I clenched my jaw. "There is no code. You have no authority here," she sighed, tilting her head. "Well, maybe officially, but we have standards in this neighborhood. Surely you understand." I took a step closer. "I understand that if I catch you on my land again, you won't like what happens next." Her smile faltered, but she didn't look scared. She looked amused. That's when I knew. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. The next morning, I drove straight to the sheriff's office. I wasn't about to sit around and let this continue. I reported the vandalism, the trespassing, the suspicious tampering with my water supply. The deputy behind the desk took notes, nodding along, but the moment I mentioned the HOA, his expression shifted. "Which board member was it?" he asked, scratching his chin. "Blonde, mid-50s. Acts like she owns the world," I said. "Calls herself an official of the HOA. The deputy let out a small sigh. "Karen Mayfield," he muttered. "Figures. You know her." "Oh, everyone knows her. She's been a pain in the ass since she moved here. Complains about everything. Says she wants to clean up the community." His eyes flicked toward me, and I didn't miss the way his voice dropped. "Especially folks who don't fit her vision." There it was. The thing no one wanted to say out loud. Karen wasn't just your run-of-the-mill HOA nightmare. She had a type of person she wanted in her community. And I wasn't it. "So, what's being done about it?" I asked. He shrugged, looking almost apologetic. "Hard to prove. If you don't have her on camera or a witness who'll back you up, it's your word against hers." I clenched my jaw. Of course, she knew exactly how far she could push. Just enough to harass me, but not enough to get caught. Fine. If the law wouldn't handle it, I would. That night, I set up cameras, trail cams hidden in trees, a motion-activated one near my well, even a small security system facing my driveway. I wasn't about to let her sneak onto my land again without proof. And sure enough, within 2 days, I caught her. The footage was crystal clear. Karen climbing my fence, marching across my land with the same smug confidence as if she owned it. The worst part? She wasn't alone. She had a couple of her HOA buddies with her. 2 men in polo shirts and khakis, the kind of guys who looked like they spent their weekends complaining to store managers. The video showed them dumping something into my water well. My drinking water. I clenched my fists, my blood boiling. This wasn't just vandalism. This was an attack. I stormed over to Karen's house the next morning. I didn't care that it was early. I pounded on her pristine white door until I heard movement inside. When she opened it, she was dressed in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand. She barely looked surprised to see me. "We need to talk," I said, voice low. She sighed, giving me a slow once-over, like I was something on the bottom of her shoe. "You really shouldn't come unannounced. It's unsettling." My fingers twitched. "I have you on camera trespassing on my land, poisoning my water." A flicker of something, panic, crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant. She sipped her coffee, unbothered. "That's a very serious accusation." I pulled out my phone, ready to show her the footage, but before I could tap the screen, she let out a dramatic sigh. "You're making such a fuss over this. I mean, really, you live next to an HOA community. There are expectations. We're simply trying to what? Run me out." She gave a slow, fake smile. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. If you're feeling unwelcome, perhaps that's something to consider." I exhaled sharply. This wasn't just about my land. This was about me. About who she thought deserved to live here and who didn't. She leaned against the doorframe. "Listen, farmer. I know people in this town. The HOA has connections. You're making this much harder than it needs to be." I stepped forward, closing the space between us. "No, you are. I held up my phone, let the screen light up just enough for her to see her own face frozen in the security footage. Her smirk wavered. "Stay off my land," I said. "Next time, I'm pressing charges." She inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. Then, to my absolute disgust, she laughed. "Oh, you sweet thing," she said, shaking her head. "You still don't get it, do you? You think the law is on your side." She leaned in, voice dropping. "Good luck proving anything when the people in charge are my friends." The door slammed in my face. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, heart hammering. Fine. If she wanted to play dirty, I play dirtier. If Karen thought I was going to roll over and let her run me off my own land, she had another thing coming. She wanted a fight? Fine. But I wasn't going to fight on her terms. That night, I set my trap. I started with the skunk spray, a little farm trick, powerful enough to make a grown man cry. I rigged a few pressure-triggered sprayers near the weak spots in my fence. The moment someone stepped onto my land, boom, they'd get a full blast of the foulest stench nature had to offer. Then I baited the trap. I left my side gate slightly ajar, just enough to make it look like I had been careless. I turned off one of my floodlights near the barn, just enough darkness to give a trespasser some false confidence. And then I waited. It was just after midnight when my motion sensors went off. I checked the cameras on my phone. There they were. Karen leading the same two HOA goons from before. They crept through the opening in my fence, flashlights bobbing. Karen was wearing an expensive-looking jacket, clutching a clipboard like she was conducting some kind of official inspection. "Let's get this over with," one of the men muttered. Karen smirked. "Oh, don't be such a baby. We just need to document a few violations for the HOA. Then we can make things difficult for our dear farmer." I gritted my teeth. I had had enough. I stepped outside, keeping to the shadows. They were too busy snooping around my property, taking pictures of my equipment, to notice me creeping closer. And then, hiss! The first skunk sprayer went off. Karen shrieked as the fine mist covered her from head to toe. She stumbled back, gagging. What is that?" One of the HOA guys got blasted next, dropping his phone as he clawed at his face. "Oh my God! It's in my mouth." I stepped into the light, arms crossed. "Enjoying my property?" Karen spun to face me, eyes wide with shock and fury. Her face was red, streaked with tears from the overwhelming smell. She tried to compose herself, but she was dripping in skunk spray. You criminal," she screeched. "You assaulted us." I let out a slow, amused breath. "Assault? Lady, you broke into my land. You trespassed. Again. And this time I have you all on camera. Again." Karen wiped at her face, but the smell wasn't coming off anytime soon. "You'll regret this. I know people. The HOA will." I held up my phone. The live feed showed them crystal clear, sneaking onto my property before getting a well-deserved bath of stink. "Oh, I'm sure the sheriff will love this," I said, tapping the screen. "I bet breaking and entering looks real nice on your record." One of the HOA men groaned, clutching his nose. "Karen, we need to go." But Karen wasn't done. She charged at me. I barely dodged as she lunged, her expensive coat flapping, her heels sinking into the mud. "You don't belong here," she screamed, eyes wild. "This is a community, not some farm. You're bringing down property values. You." She didn't get to finish, because just then, the real sheriff's cruiser pulled up, sirens off, but lights flashing. I had called them earlier, knowing full well Karen would try something stupid. And here she was. The sheriff stepped out, arms crossed. "Karen Mayfield," he said, voice laced with disappointment. "I warned you." Karen froze. "Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding." "I don't think so," he interrupted. "We've got you on camera trespassing. Again. And tampering with this man's property. This is enough for charges." Karen's face twisted in fury, but she wasn't in control anymore. She had lost. "Now," the sheriff said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Are you going to come quietly, Or do we need to add resisting arrest to your list of problems? Karen's smirk was gone. Her face twisted in shock, rage, and just a hint of fear as the sheriff held up the cuffs. But Karen Mayfield wasn't the type to go down without a fight. At least, not without trying to weasel her way out of it first. She plastered on her best victim face. "Sheriff, please. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just checking on a community violation." She turned to me, her voice shifting into fake sweetness. "I was concerned about your well, you see. It's an eyesore. It might be a health hazard. I was simply doing my duty." The sheriff raised a brow. "By sneaking onto his land in the middle of the night?" Karen faltered, her lips pressing into a thin line. One of her HOA buddies, still reeking of skunk spray, muttered under his breath, "Karen, let's just go." But she wasn't done. She whirled toward me. "You set us up," she snapped. This trap you laid. This was premeditated." I let out a slow, amused breath. "So, let me get this straight. You're admitting you were trespassing, but you're mad I was prepared for it?" Karen's face turned red. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" She turned back to the sheriff, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Listen to me, Charlie. I know you. I know your boss. Do you really think you're going to arrest me over this?" The sheriff sighed. "Karen, I've had complaints about you for years, but you were always just annoying, not criminal." He pointed at my phone where the live footage was still playing. This is a crime, and I'm done letting you slide." Karen's jaw clenched. She looked at the two HOA men, but they refused to meet her gaze. The first one was already backing away toward his car. The second one, still covered in skunk spray, just shook his head. "You're on your own, Karen," he muttered. Her mouth fell open. "What? You cowards. You!" I cleared my throat, cutting her off. "Oh, and Karen?" I held up my phone again. "This footage? It's not just for the sheriff. It's already uploaded to a cloud drive, and I just emailed a copy to the local news." Karen froze. I saw it then, that moment of realization, that sinking dread. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. This wasn't something she could smooth over with HOA meetings or veiled threats. This was exposure. Public. Permanent. "You wouldn't," she whispered. I grinned. "Oh, I already did." And then, as if fate had impeccable timing, my phone dinged. I glanced at the notification. New comments on video. HOA president caught trespassing. And it backfires horribly. Karen must have seen the look on my face because she lunged, trying to snatch my phone right out of my hands. "You delete that right now," she screeched. I took a step back, holding it just out of reach. "Nah. I think the public deserves to see who's really running their HOA." The sheriff had had enough. He grabbed Karen's arm, yanking her back. "That's assault, Karen." She thrashed against his grip. "No and oh, you can't do this. I built this community. You think they'll side with a farmer over me? Over the HOA?" She turned toward the houses down the street, eyes wild, searching for any of her neighbors to come to her aid. And for the first time, she realized no one was coming. A few people had stepped outside, drawn by the commotion. A couple of porch lights had flicked on. But no one spoke. No one rushed to defend her. They just watched. Karen swallowed hard. Even the people she thought were on her side weren't willing to stand up for her now. "Looks like your little HOA kingdom is crumbling," I murmured. The sheriff turned her around and pulled out his radio. "We got a 10 to 15 in progress. Suspect in custody." Karen let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a growl and a sob. "This is unfair," she shrieked. "I was trying to protect this neighborhood. He doesn't belong here. His kind." She caught herself too late. A sharp, ugly silence fell. Even her own HOA friends recoiled. The sheriff's grip on her tightened. "Yeah," he said, voice cold. "That's what I thought." Karen knew. Right then. It was over. There was no saving her now. She let out one last furious shriek as the sheriff forced her into the back of his cruiser. "You'll regret this. You think this is over." I leaned down, grinning through the open window. "Oh, Karen," I said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "It's just beginning." The door slammed shut. The cruiser pulled away. And just like that, Karen Mayfield, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, was finally dethroned. The fallout was glorious. By the next morning, Karen Mayfield's name was everywhere. The footage of her trespassing, ranting about protecting the neighborhood, and her final racist outburst had gone viral. The news picked it up within hours. HOA meetings turned into war zones as residents scrambled to distance themselves from her. By noon, the HOA's official website crashed under the weight of angry emails. Sponsors for the annual community events pulled out. And Karen? She was done. The sheriff formally charged her with trespassing, harassment, and destruction of property. But that was just the beginning, because then the lawsuits started. I filed the first one. Damage to my well, emotional distress, repeated harassment. My lawyer assured me it was a slam dunk. But the real knife in Karen's back came from the very HOA she had once ruled. They turned on her instantly. The HOA board, desperate to save face, voted her out within 24 hours. Then they hit her with their own legal action, claiming her actions had irreparably harmed their reputation. The irony was delicious. She had spent years bullying homeowners, forcing them to pay absurd fines for minor infractions. Now, she was drowning in legal fees. The bank foreclosed on her house within months. Without the HOA backing her, Karen couldn't keep up with the payments. Her once pristine home, the symbol of her power, went up for auction. I bought it, not because I wanted it, but because I could. The day I walked through her empty house, I could still feel her presence. The pristine, lifeless decor. The HOA rulebooks stacked on the counter. The surveillance cameras she had installed herself, once used to police her neighbors, now gathering dust. I stood in her old living room, took a deep breath, and smiled. Poetic justice. The neighborhood changed after that. The tension, gone. People started talking to each other more, no longer afraid of breaking some unwritten HOA law. Kids rode bikes freely without fear of some ridiculous noise complaint. Gardens flourished. And the new HOA president? A young black woman named Rachel, who immediately revoked half of Karen's old policies. One evening, she stopped by my house with a six-pack. We sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the trees. "You really shook things up," she said, smirking. I took a sip of my beer. "Had to be done." She nodded. "You know, people used to whisper about you, about how you didn't belong." I turned to her, raising a brow. She grinned. "Not anymore." I chuckled, feeling something settle inside me. The unease I had felt since the day I moved in. The constant watchful eyes, the whispered judgment, the passive-aggressive HOA letters. It was gone. I was home, and this time no one could take that from me. Justice had been served. And damn, did it feel good.